Hi, this is Marlin Simon, doing what I do best, duck soup. Things should be easy in life. And I was just thinking about the years I have played around with flying. And as a kid, I didn't get up in an airplane until I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I remember Fred Wood out in California. He worked for my father as a branch manager at Pitney Bowes. And he also flew. He was in the Navy, and I sort of connected with the old guy. And he took my mother and my sister and myself up in a small fabric-covered airplane. And I can't remember exactly what kind it was, but it was a little four-seater. And this was 1947 or 1948. And we flew from... I lived in San Mateo, California at the time, and we drove over to Oakland, and he rented a plane there. And I remember flying over Mount Tamalpais, and I thought, man, this is wild. You could look down and see the San Francisco Bay, and it was just sort of a neat experience. So we moved from there to Miami in 1948, and I started playing with boats immediately and building them and rebuilding them. About the time I was 13 years old, I really was getting into wanting to learn about flying. So I got some books on flying and what you did and how you do it. And I ended up building myself an airplane in the living room of our house at 2471 Tiger Tail Avenue in Coconut Grove. And my mother and father just went along with that kind of stuff. I got some kind of a seat, and then I built a stick like you'd have in a stick aircraft. And then I had plywood pieces and different kinds of wood, and I set up the ailerons, and then I set up the tail and the elevator, and you could pull back in the stick and you could watch the tail come up, and I played with it each way with the ailerons, and you could watch the ailerons go up and down. And I was learning how to fly, and I had been reading the books, so down elevator and the plane will go down, pull back and the plane will go up. And so I would sit in the living room and fly this plane that I had built. I had all kind of little hinges and stuff, and all the ropes and that stuff that made the elevators move. So I could fly this thing, and I put pedals down there, and I had a tail that actually the rudder would work. And I was having fun at, like I said, about 13. My wife looks back on that now and says, you were a geek way before geeks were geekable. But I figured, well, duck soup, I can do this. Well, it wasn't until years later that I really got up on an airplane. I went back to college in 1966, and I was at East Tennessee State University, and I was taking 21 hours, the most they'd let you take at that time, and they had a course on how to fly, but it was another 5-hour course, and they wouldn't let me take it. So I did it anyway, without the college knowing it. And East Tennessee State had a flying club at the time, and we had an Aranca 7AC Champ. And it had been through the mill. The wings were racked out of shape, and it had been in so many accidents, but it was still flyable. And I had a couple guys there that ended up in Vietnam. They were both pilots. They wanted to be jet jockeys, and they went on to that. And they were actually younger than I was at the time. And they would take me up in the plane. I had to pay $4.85 an hour to be able to fly the plane. And these two guys were teaching me how to fly it. And when I got in that plane, it was a stick plane and had the pedals. It was just like what I remembered when I was 13 years old. And everything they told me to do, I just did it. And I felt like it was just part of who I was at the time. It was interesting how the brain remembers all that kind of stuff. So they'd say, well, do this and do that, and I'd just do it. And I'd come back down, and these two guys, they would talk to each other, and they would say, I just told him how to do this, and he did it. And to me, it just seemed like it was sort of natural, but they were surprised that I caught on so quickly. Well, I ended up getting 1 hour of official instructed time, and by this time they had taken me up probably 7 or 8 hours, and they had showed me how to do all these different maneuvers and everything. They had me land in pastures, and they pulled the power off, all the kind of stuff that the instructor should do. So they said, we're going to take you over and see if we can get you signed off so you can solo the plane. They took me over to a field someplace in Tennessee, and we landed it there, and they said, talked to this instructor that they knew, and he said, we'd like to get this guy checked out and see if you can get a solo him. And he said, well, how many hours you got? And I said, I only got an hour of official time. So he takes me up, puts me through the mill, and he says, go ahead and land the plane. And this plane didn't have flaps or anything, so I'm going on down, and I realized I need to really kick it, so I slammed it over, slipped it in, dropped it in, and just like they had taught me. Wasn't any problem. Well, he looks at me, he said, let me see your logbook. And I had 1 hour in it. And he said, I'm going to have to sign you off for a little bit more time, but you can solo it. And I said, okay. I noticed there's nobody on the field, and I said, could I go up and play with the plane, because I've never been in it by myself. And he said, yeah, okay. So I went up there about 2,500 feet or so, and right over the airport, right where these guys are, I started doing 90-degree lazy eights, and I was pulling up and 90 degrees to the horizon, diving back down, and man, it felt so good. It was so neat. And I did that for a while, lazy eights, and then I figured, well, I'll go around and I'd set the thing back down. Well, this guy comes out and says, where did you learn that? And I went, I'm not supposed to know this? And he just chewed me out really good. And he said, first of all, that was an aerobatic maneuver. You can't be doing it in this airplane, and all this kind of stuff. I said, sorry, I didn't know. So I get back in the plane and with the guy that brought me over there, and he said, did you tell him anybody taught you? And I said, I didn't tell him anything. I just did it. And he said, well, I forgot to tell you, when we were teaching you all this stuff, we taught you a little bit beyond what you normally do to solo an airplane. Well, they had taught me not only steep bank lazy eights, but they had taught me chandelles, and they had given me a bunch of different information that I probably wasn't supposed to know at the time. But anyway, we were doing stuff that I thought was really neat. So anyway, long story short, I got 38 hours in that plane, and I ended up down in the Cayman Islands fairly soon after that, and I ended up with the instructor down there, Don Armstrong, who happened to be the United States chief civilian test pilot during the Second World War. And Don was an incredible guy. He ended up being one of the 4 men that tested at the speed of sound, and he's the only one that survived it. All the rest of them crashed and died. And Don was a really cool kind of guy. And he had scars all over his body from being in airplane accidents and stuff. And he brought the first jet into the United States and ended up flaming out somewhere over Virginia, and called in. He couldn't call in. He had a complete electrical failure, and he ended up dead sticking it into the famous air base up there where the presidential plane flies out of now. and walked up into the tower. This is the middle of the night. Walked into the tower, tapped the guy on the shoulder, and said, "We've got a plane on the runway down there. We need to do something about." And the guy, "Ah, where did you come from?" Well, it turns out that he had brought the plane in from Canada, and had the flame out right there. And anyway, story after story, and how he lost the tail of his airplane at 40,000 feet while he was testing at the speed of sound. He was the first man to take pictures of the color change on the wings right at the speed of sound. And, anyway, that's another whole story there. But back down there in Cayman, I wanted to get my license, and I only lacked a few hours. So Don put me under the hood for the first 5 hours. I never saw the island, and I said at one point, I said, "Don, I see what you're doing. Can I take a look at it with my hood off?" And he said, "Yeah." He pulled the plane up, laid it over on its back on an angle, and I'm on my back, and he says, "Recover it." So I just recovered it. But I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was doing it all on instruments, and he insisted that a good pilot totally know instruments if they're going to be able to fly. And so I did all that, and then he said, "Have you ever stalled a plane?" I said, yeah, I stalled the Champ. We stall it and spin it." So he said, "Go ahead and spin this one." Well, this is a 150 Cessna, totally different animal than the old Aranca Champ. And I pulled it back, pulled the power back, put it up in a stall, and kicked the rudder so it started to spin. And then I kicked it out, and in a spin in a Champ, you have to give it full down forward stick to be able to get your nose over to get yourself enough airspeed to keep flying. Well, the 150 was a whole different animal, but I spun it and just automatically pushed it over, and we were headed straight down. And I didn't realize that the 150 picked up speed and everything like that. You didn't have to push it over, and we're headed straight down. And the first thing I did was make sure the power was pulled all the way back, and I'm just real gently trying to pull back because I see what we're doing. It went so far over red line, I'm surprised the engine didn't come apart. And Don was so cool. He sat over there and he said, "Easy, boy, easy." And I knew exactly what he meant, because we could have gone into a secondary spin or a secondary stall. I could have pulled the wings off the airplane, pulling it too hard. And we dropped about over 2,000 feet in just a matter of seconds, and slowly pulled out of it. We were way over red line before I finally gave it some power, or I needed to. But that was a really incredible experience. And Don went on further to teach me commercial pilot. I ended up taking my commercial written test, passed that, and I just never got enough hours to get my commercial license. But when I came back to the States after working with a turtle farm, one of my ideas was to get my commercial pilot's license. But since that time, my son has got his pilot's license and has 2 airplanes. My grandson is now flying. So if I want to enjoy getting up in the airplane, I ask the kids and they take me out. So anyway, God has protected me and kept me alive, and it's been a blessing. And having fun in the air is a way to go. God bless you.